Hi, this is Bill, and this is Progpaganda. Over the course of the last dozen or so shows we've done on this channel, we've explored our list of proto-prog albums, 25 albums recorded during the late 1960s that contributed to the rise of the genre of music that we now call progressive rock. Our first episode in that series listed each of the 25 albums and provided the criteria through which we selected the items on the list of 25. If you haven't seen that episode yet, please feel free to tune in. It's available at this link. We've also done deep dives on a little more than half of the albums in the list, covering entries from the years 1965, 1966, 1967, and 1968. Please feel free to check those out if you haven't already done so. We've gone into some detail on the albums we've covered, and I think you'll find it enjoyable. The subject of today's show is an album released in July of 1968, the Grateful Dead's second album, Anthem of the Sun. I'm sure that some people are listening to this introduction and thinking, the Grateful Dead are not a progressive rock band. To be fair, they really weren't a prog band in 1968. The music they were doing was much more blues and Americana style based. They would, in their later years, put their toe in the prog rock water, so to speak, with albums like Blues for Allah, Wake of the Flood, and Terrapin Station. But that was quite a ways off. Where the Dead make their contribution to prog rock with Anthem of the Sun is less with the music and more with how the album was made. The Grateful Dead, throughout their history, were first and foremost always a live band. And in 1968, they were still working to try and find their ways around the recording studio and use the studio to best effect. Their first album was made with the legendary producer David Hassinger, who had worked with numerous blues musicians in Chicago and had also done the Rolling Stones' first album. The Dead's first album was an okay album, I guess is the way I would put it. It's not a bad album, certainly. It's well recorded and well performed, but it's basically the Dead playing the blues, and not their own music. It's pretty much Chicago blues standards. And in that regard, there's probably not a whole lot that I would call all that special about it. The Dead wanted to change that going forward. And the decision that was made upon reviewing the songs that they had available and how they could present them in a recorded context was to intersperse studio and live recordings together seamlessly to present a different vision of the songs that would not be possible strictly through performance on stage or through the studio. Jerry Garcia and Phil Lesh headed the project from within the band. In order to achieve their vision, they enlisted their sound man, Dan Healy, and a keyboard player they knew from outside of the band, Tom Constantine, who, based on his work with the band on this album, would perform with the band for the next couple of years on and off. And the result they created was a rather striking one. Some of the songs on this album, like, for example, Alligator and That's It for the Other One, are Grateful Dead classics. They made solid use of the studio to be able to build their themes, but also made use of tapes from no less than 6 different live shows recorded in the 1967-68 timeframe in order to put across the songs in the way that they thought made the best sense for public consumption. It's a wild ride, and in the words of the Dead's drummer, Bill Kreutzmann, is a psychedelic experience even to this day. It is truly unique because it's probably not something that would be easily achieved again, even by a modern band with modern technology. And of course, recording technology is much more understood and widespread today than it was in 1968, where 4-track recording equipment was the normal. The Dead went out of their way for this album to find 8-track studios where they could. And even there, I suspect they probably look back at this one and wonder how they could have done it better if it had been a few years later with better technology. Still in all, it's a record that really resonates. It's one that even non-Grateful Dead fans look at with some level of reverence because of the chances and the innovation that was pursued here. From a prog rock perspective, it's an important record because it turned some bands on to the fact that they also were as good live as they were in the studio and could use that to a solid effect. Albums like, for example, King Crimson's Starless and Bible Black and Frank Zappa's Shake Your Booty, of course, both of these being significantly later in time than the Dead's album. On those albums, Robert Fripp, in the case of King Crimson, and Frank Zappa both employed similar techniques in order to make use of the live environment to the best effect that they could, while not being afraid to employ overdubs or other techniques in order to put the music across as best as possible. As the technology improved, this is something that became more and more frequent, and the music became better for it, at least in my opinion. So the Grateful Dead, maybe not a prog rock band in 1968, but they made their mark, and they made a solid one. That's all for this episode. As always, we hope you enjoy it. If you like what you're seeing, please click like on the video. Please subscribe to the channel. We'll do our best to present great material for you in the weeks ahead as we finish out this series and get into other topics of conversation going forward. We still have about 10 episodes in this series on Proto-Prog to complete. Our next one is one you won't want to miss. It covers a landmark album in electronic recording, Wendy Carlos's Switched on Bach. Thanks for joining us. You take good care. Bye-bye.